All right, good morning. This is the this is our fourth chapter in Cary's book, The Meaning of Protestant Theology. We're finishing up the first section of the whole work, which really has focused as a whole on spirituality and the being of God. That's its section title. And the goal here is to kind of show the context of Christian theology and its development, coming from Augustine. Or set the stage that's set by Augustine. And here he's trying to kind of finish setting the stage for Protestantism. And he does this in the fourth chapter, which is called the Augustinian Journey and Its Anxieties. So here he's getting to this question of he's following if faith, as he's kind of shown for Augustine, is knowledge of the right way. Right? Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. That is, he helps us. He is the one who mediates, comes to us in the world of our bondage to physical things and our material things. And he is a material thing, a person, who then leads us to the right knowledge and right understanding and love of God. The beatific vision, the vision of truth itself, of justice itself, of God in God's self, right? If that's the goal of salvation, to know by faith and then journey towards the good, then you have to recognize that faith alone does not save. Faith is what sets you on the road, what sets you on the right road, and what keeps you from going to other roads. But faith is not the thing that moves you down the road. What moves you down the road is your love for the object at the end of the road, your love for God. So for Augustine, faith and love together are part of the salvific story, and they must be, because faith doesn't get you there. Faith is the way that sets you on the right road, and then you, by love, are brought there. And that's important. You, by love, are brought there is probably the right way of saying that, because love is a movement, a desire for a particular object that draws you towards it. And in doing so, it binds you with all the others who love this object. So for Augustine, then community in the church, being part of this community of love that is bound to the faith of Christ and is carried along by love, is really important. When mutual people love something, they are bound together by that love. And that is basically the understanding of the church here. But that then raises this question: are we actually saved now? If we have a journey to make, we're not actually there yet. And for Augustine, it's really important to say that we're not yet saved. We are saved in hope. That is, we are saved. We are on the right road, but we are not yet there. We're not yet at our destination. Which means that, okay, so how do we know we're going to get there? Right? How do we know we're going to get there? And this is complicated by what in Augustine's later life, his discussions with the Pelagians, and coming to a robust understanding of grace, and a robust understanding of grace that sees that God is the one who causes everything good in us. God is the one who causes faith. God is the one who causes love. God is the one who causes anything that is good, that moves us in the right direction, is caused by God. So the relationship of grace or free will becomes important for us, because the question is, and so what he goes into the question of, well, how do grace and free will relate? If Augustine's right that grace means that God is solely responsible for what brings us to the end, how do we know we're going to be given that grace? How do we know we're actually going to be sustained all the way along the way? If it's not by the freedom of your will, so ultimately, to jump to the end of it, the question is going to be, how do we know that why some will persevere to the end and not others? And Augustine's answer is, it's all a gift of grace. Faith is grace, and the other gift of grace is perseverance. That you will persevere in the faith is a gift of God's grace. And that raises the question, well, how do we know who's going to persevere? How do I know that I'm elect? So it's a very personal question. How do I know that I will persevere to the end, if that's what I have to do in order to be saved? And that brings in the Augustinian anxiety that he's talking about. And he was really driving towards here, which is that ultimately the answer is those who are elect, those who are predestined, will persevere. And, well, how do I know if I'm predestined? You don't. That's the whole point, is that you don't know. Predestination is hidden for Augustine, and then for the Reformation thinkers who carry from him. The election of God is hidden in the hiddenness of God, and you don't actually know whether you're going to persevere. You know that what God has given you, grace and faith, but you do not know that you're going to have the gift that carries you all the way through the end, the gift of love and perseverance. And then, so he's kind of set up this understanding of what's going to become a Protestant anxiety, which is, how do I know that I'm going to be that I am elect, or that I am ultimately going to be saved? And I think this is going to get answered in different ways as he goes forward. But he kind of closes by pointing out that by arguing that Augustine makes a misstep here in his understanding of election. And that misstep is not understanding, well, first, let me say, he credits Augustine with being here more biblical than Platonist. Because a Platonist can talk of the good or God as a general thing that you can desire. We could desire justice. We could desire truthfulness. We desire love. Those are kind of general things. But we don't talk, we don't talk about God, but the Bible talks about God choosing some rather than others. And that's very particular. And that's very different than kind of this idea of a general desire that you can have for another. So the Bible very clearly talks about God choosing Israel. It talks about God choosing Jesus. It talks about God choosing believers. And so that means that Augustine is bound to the text, and he follows the text, and he's led to a place where he has to say God he's ultimately responsible for who's saved and who's not, and he's chosen it outside of time. It's not something you can change or earn or affect in any way, but you don't get to know that you're elect. And he argues Augustine's made a misstep here by missing the fact that the biblical doctrine of election is more rightly understood as choosing one for the blessing of others. That is, Abraham is chosen to be a blessing to all nations. Abraham and his descendants. Israel is chosen to be a blessing to all nations. And then he brings in Karl Barth and Karl Barth's move, which reframes the doctrine of election, saying that God has elected Jesus for the sake of the world. God has elected Jesus for the sake of the world. And here's a statement. What the doctrine of election really means is that God gave us the Jewish people, God gave the Jewish people to the world because he intended all along to give us his own son, the King of the Jews. So I'm going to have to think through this and kind of read kind of Lutheran interactions with Augustine in the 20th century, Lutheran interactions with Barth's doctrine of predestination in the 20th century. Because while in one sense, I know I've read Barth's argument here and I understand the biblical kind of basis for it, and the degrees of truth in it, where exactly it has its own kind of, there's its own conversation going on with Barth's doctrine of election. We're going to have to revisit sometime. And I wish he had said more here towards the end about how exactly. He probably will. He's still got part 2 and 3 of this book to go. But ultimately, where he's landed us is just for setting the stage and saying, here's the anxieties of that Augustine gave us in his attempt to kind of synthesize and understand the biblical revelation within the framework of his understanding of Platonism and his understanding of spirituality, that it leaves you with ultimately a journey that you have to make through faith and love, faith being the way that you get set on the right road by the mediator Jesus, who's come into your level and given you something. He's come to the place where the only things you love are material things. Well, he's become a material thing. So he can then set you on the right road to where you will rightly love the immaterial God. And how do you know you will finally get to that place? You don't know. That's the anxiety. And that ultimately is going to be the framework within which Protestantism emerges and responds differently to that set of anxieties. So that's part 1. From here, it goes on to the gospel. Part 2 is all about the gospel and the power of God, and it looks at the young Luther and Luther the Reformer. So we've kind of set the stage now, and now we're going to talk about, now Cary's going to look at Luther himself and how Luther reframes and reacts to this context. So, thanks so much. Bye.